I've changed my makeup. Did you notice?
Hello and welcome to the new season of Something Rotten. Blake Hester and I are here, and we are so excited to talk about some weirdo games by a weirdo man named Goichi Suda. Blake, you texted me that you are Suda-pilled.
I'm Suda-pilled, dude. Here's the thing. For years, motherfucker's been saying, Blake, how have you not played Suda 51's games? His legal name, not Goichi Suda. I don't know what that is. They're going to be your favorite of all time. And I just drug my feet. And then, of course, the second I played them, it vindicated years of people saying, you got to play this crazy man's games. Because I'm Suda-pilled. I'm so stoked. This is like up there with Darkness 2 levels of I kind of wanted to just record last night.
So you could keep playing today? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, straight up.
So we are talking about the first half of Killer7 through the mission Cloudman, for those playing along with us. Killer7 is available for PC. It's surprisingly easy to run. I kind of thought it was going to be more of a struggle.
Right.
Anyway, I'm here, Blake is here, but that's not all, because we have formerly of Game Informer and MinMax, currently of writer at Big Blue Sky Games, and a man who I think at one point your favorite game of all time was Killer7. Is that still the case? Suriel Vasquez.
Yeah, hello. It's great to be here, first of all. Second of all, I think it's sort of fluctuated, but I would say that on a given day, I think, this is probably my favorite game of all time. And it's more, I think this has been less, I think the other game that competes with it is Dota 2, but I think that game has fallen off. I haven't played Dota 2 in a while, so it's almost by dint of Dota kind of not being in my rotation that I think this game has just ascended. But yeah, I love this game a lot. It kind of hit me I was definitely like in the right time to be hit by this game. But we'll talk more about why that is, but definitely like both a foundational game, and I think playing it for this still, like, I think is still a game that whips ass, I think.
Yes, sir. And look forward to next season where we're playing Dota 2. Suriel's favorite game.
That's right. You can knock that out in 2 weeks for sure.
I was going to ask, is Killer7 and Dota 2, are those the two most opposite games ever made?
You know what? I think you are right in that. I think that the reasons I love them are almost entirely diametrically opposed. Where Dota 2 is a game that I love because it basically has every possible mechanic a video game can have, and Killer7 is a game that says, we don't need mechanics where we're going, baby.
That's right. We don't even need movement control.
Yeah.
To give a peek behind the curtain so the listener can understand how this season came to be, Suriel effectively held us up at gunpoint and told us, y'all have to do a Suda season.
I pulled out my gun and went into scan mode and found your weak points and said, we need this season to happen, because I do think, like, when I think of rotten games, it's like this is one of the most rotten games that I can think of.
Oh, buddy,
for sure.
And is it, Jacob? How are you doing with your Killer7 Odyssey?
I'm good. I'll tell you, I really loved the opening mission, and then like the next two, I was kind of like, oh, so maybe it's not going to be able to, like, keep it up. And then the last one we played for today, Cloudman, I was like, holy shit, we're so back. Like,
oh, interesting. Cloudman was the one I found. I was like super in mission 1 and 2. Then Cloudman started to get a bit frustrating for me. We can talk about those giant men and the way this game maybe doesn't explain certain mechanics to you. But then I saw the I would guess 4.5 hour cutscene at the end of Cloudman, and I was like, oh, buddy, I'm back in.
That's it. Okay, can I tell you? I want to tell you the moment that I knew we had made a right decision, and then we can start doing like background on this game and Suda and stuff, because we have a lot to say. But it is in the tutorial mission where you've done this stuff. You know, there's in this game there's no movement controls except for like A to run forwards. I had been playing, I had been enjoying it. Eventually, you turn into an old man who looks like the Quaker Oats man in a wheelchair. You meet with like Hatsune Miku essentially with angel wings, and you pull out essentially a Barrett 50 cal, and it's just like, go for it. Hey, do whatever you want. And I was like, oh my god, this is the most rotten game.
You're skipping over the part where the animation to pull that gun out is the longest animation in video game history. So help you God if you press that button on accident and you have to sit through both animations of him pulling it out and then putting it back. It's mind-numbing.
That is a great moment where Harmon Smith says, anime was a mistake and I'm about to take care of it.
Yeah, straight up. Here's a question I have, just so I can get my potential stupidity out of the way. Jacob, and perhaps Suriel, if you remember the first time you played this game, at what point did you realize you could level your characters up?
Oh gosh, it was I accidentally clicked on like the blood guy on the TV, and I was like, huh, what's he doing?
Yeah.
And I was just kind of like, I was clicking through the things on that TV, but I should be forthcoming in that, like, I'm looking at a walkthrough for a lot of this game. I'm kind of not organically discovering many of the mechanics, but even still, I was like, I don't know what these things mean or how I'm gaining this blood or what it's going to.
I was at the end of the third mission when I noticed in the pause menu that Coyote had stats next to his picture, and I was like, what the hell? And then I had to go on a whole new journey just to figure out how to upgrade him. At that point, it turned out I could upgrade most of my characters, like, very far, and it made the game way easier, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it turns out.
So I had a weird experience with this game, actually, where, which I don't think is, atypical of this game, but I played the PS2 version, which is not a great version of that game. The loading times are worse, and it was kind of done by a different company. And Suda has all but, I think, disowned kind of his work on it. And I played that, and I found it, like, kind of inscrutable in a lot of ways. I played the first mission, and then by the time I got through the midpoint of the second mission, I was like, I don't know about this game. Because the way I had heard about it was actually after reading a review of No More Heroes in Nintendo Power, where they make like a really strong case for like, hey, you should support games like this because no one else makes them quite like this. And I played through No More Heroes and loved it and said, like, what else has this company made? And I found Killer7 and I played it that way. And then I went through a YouTube video, kind of Let's Play, back when those were limited to 10 minutes a piece.
Right.
When you couldn't upload videos that were longer than 10 minutes. So I went through like, Killer7 part 20, but like when I was playing it, the upgrade mechanic was definitely like, am I even upgrading it? Was, I think, with the point that I got to of like, I'm investing points and this says levels, but I'm not entirely sure what exactly I'm doing.
Yeah, because none of them are like health. It's not the skills you think you would get.
No. But let me tell you, they help. Because if you are playing the end of the third level completely non-upgraded, and then you upgrade afterwards, you are acutely aware of how underpowered you were for most of that game. They help a lot. That double shot, oh my god. It's so good.
Sorry, it's interesting you bring up the YouTube thing, because God willing, our guest next week actually told me that, like, it was a big game for her, but she's never played it. She like totally interacted with it through YouTube things, which I think is kind of, I knew about this game a long time ago, and I think it was from me Googling like weirdest games or whatever when I was a kid, and it would like, because I remember seeing the cutscene at the end of the Cloudman stage in some like GameSpot top 10 countdown or something. I was like, I have seen this, or maybe I was just like watching a video review of it, but it's like, it is so visually striking and also so kind of off-putting to play sometimes that like, I think it really lends itself to that kind of early Let's Play environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely like, it's weird, like putting my flag down and saying like, this is my favorite game of all time, because it's not a game that I would like readily recommend it to a lot of people. It's almost like if imagine if your favorite food just happened to be wasabi and you're like, not a thing you're gonna say, hey, go hit up this place, they have great wasabi there. It's kind of you kind of have to get a feel for the person and say like, I think you want to try this and like experience it for yourself. But it's not a thing where you're constantly like, you know, you're not an evangelist for this thing of like, everyone should play this, even though I think most people should. But it's like in like that personal setting, it's hard to say like, yeah, everyone should play this game, because it's definitely like not a game that is like meets all of the check marks for what is a good designed video game, you know?
Y'all have any games you're fans of you've never played?
Great question.
Because I have one for sure. Like, I feel like I would count myself as a pretty big Silent Hill fan, and I've never played them, but I've spent so much of my life just kind of obsessed with Silent Hill. Never touched them.
There are definitely games that I've, like, listened to the soundtracks to constantly. And, like, never
Silent
played.
Hill.
You know, that's one. L.A. Noire. I played that, but I didn't finish it. But I still think about that game. I'm like, that game rocks.
Yeah. I think mine would probably be the King of Fighters 13, which I have played, but I haven't, like, not in the, like, I think I've maybe played it for an hour, but I've watched a lot of tournaments for that game. And, like, that game is so much fun to watch, but, I have not touched it much at all. I mean, I don't know a ton of the systems. I only know what I know from having played even, like, King of Fighters 14, which came out after, but I still like watching 13 more.
That's valid. You can be a fan of a game and not play it. Jacob, do you think we host a good podcast?
Yeah, I think so. Do you?
Hell no. Have you heard this thing? It's full of ads where we act like buffoons.
Okay, a little rude. I write most of the ads.
That's why I subscribe to the Something Rotten podcast on Nebula, where I get early, bonus, and most importantly, ad-free episodes delivered straight to my podcast app of choice.
Do you not like my ads? We get people telling us they like our ads.
A few months ago, I went to nebula.tv/somethingrottenpodcast. I paid a small monthly fee, and now I have access to this show. Jacob, I also have access to all your secret videos, like where you cook with your partner. Those are very good.
That's true.
And thousands of hours of other great podcasts and videos from creators I love, like Leo Vader. You ever heard of this guy? Funny as the day is long. It has made my life way better, too, not having to hear those goofy-ass ads anymore.
Blake, I poured my heart into those ads, and you wrote this and are just freaking slandering me all over the place.
Should tried harder, bucko. That's nebula.tv/somethingrotten. Get early, ad-free, and bonus episodes of this show and more when you sign up at the link.
You know what our sponsor, Henson Razors, is really good for?
Yeah, making you have less hair on your body, doofus.
Okay, but also gifts. Father's Day just passed, but this is a super classy and kind of cool thing to give for a birthday or something. My friend's son recently graduated high school, and this is a true story. He got him a Henson razor as like a "you're a man now" present. Son, here's your razor.
Jacob, you're like 26. How do you have a friend that just got a son that graduated high school?
Because I have mature friends, Blake.
Well, regardless, I hope your friend remembered to go to hensonshaving.com, use the promo code ROTTEN, so he could also give his son a free box of blades.
Happy graduation, son. Here's 100 razor blades. So do you think we should... I feel like we should do one of two things here. One, explain what Killer7 is, or two, explain who Suda is. Which one do you want to do first?
I think Suda would maybe make more sense.
All right. Well, you read about this man for 4 hours last night, apparently.
Sure.
So tell me what you found out.
Suda's interesting. He's from the country, as I learned. Moved to Tokyo with no aspirations.
Oh, I thought you were just going to say the country of Japan.
No, the countryside.
Like, yes, I knew.
The countryside, I believe Nagano. Moved to Tokyo with absolutely no aspirations of being a game developer. That was like not even on his radar. In fact, he was working for a little while. He worked part-time, and so this is kind of interesting, as a graphic designer, and did some graphic designs for Sega, specifically Yu Suzuki's company within Sega, which I think was AM2. And so did some like posters for Virtua Racer. And he has this story about how, like, similar to Tim Schafer's story, there's a weird parallel here where Tim Schafer and Suda both talk about, like, they thought games were made by, like, these hyper... And they are made by, like, very smart people, obviously. But they thought they were made by, like, scientists and shit.
Yeah.
And they were engineers.
Yeah, and when he went to meet with Yu Suzuki... He saw people his age. He talks about them like listening to like Nirvana at their desks and being like really mind blown about like, oh, this is who makes games. It's like people my age. But for a long time, he was working as as a mortuary assistant, something like that.
An undertaker.
Yeah, as an undertaker, and I believe it was part time. Like he thought that was going to be his thing. He was going to go full time into this, and his wife was like, his wife was the realest one. She was like, "For real, dude, like you're like 24. This is what you want to do? You want to be a full time undertaker?" And so he started looking for jobs. And this just goes to show what the game industry was like in probably the late 80s, early 90s. He found companies that were like looking for people to work for them, and they're like, no experience needed. It's just an insane thing to think about now, because these days you might need to be a scientist to work on video games, because it's like
there's definitely like a strong undercurrent when you talk about origin stories for a lot of famous game developers of just like, we don't know what experience in the video game field looks like, so it's like a lot of people just kind of fell into it in a way that does not seem at all feasible now.
Exactly. His story gets even wilder when he applied to Human Entertainment, which was doing a lot of like sports games. If you've ever heard,
and Blake, may I? He kind of went from one Undertaker to another.
That's good stuff, Jacob. Thank you. I don't think they had the license for WWE, but that is a good joke. Human Entertainment was the developer. I didn't know this, of the fabled Stadium Events game, which is like the most rare NES game of all time. Just a weird little thing there. I don't think Suda worked on that.
Is that the same? I feel like I've played the arcade cabinet of that, right? Where you like, do you know what it looks? Is it the one where you're doing like Olympic sports?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I've played. There's like a barcade near my house that I've done where you do like the long jump or the pole vault, and it's just like pressing two buttons really fast.
Oh, that might be a different one. That might be one of Capcom's.
That could just be track and field.
Yeah.
Oh, it's probably that. Okay.
Anyway, so he applied to Human Entertainment. They did not get back to him until his wife convinced him to call and ask, to be like, can I do anything? His wife was so real, dude. He owes his career to his wife.
This is like Suda and Stephen King. Their wives being like, you should do something with this.
So he called, and freak coincidence, one of their directors had just up and quit, who was directing this run of wrestling games. And Human Entertainment...
That was my Undertaker joke.
There we go. We've brought it together. Human Entertainment was like, this dude just quit. He was a big-time director for us. You have no experience. Can you direct games for us? So he was like, yeah. And, I don't know. He went and directed some sports games. Suriel, you want to take over from here? You might know a little bit.
Yeah, so I think the first game that he worked on at Human, I believe, was Fire Pro Wrestling 3, some version of 3, because I think those games had multiple revisions.
Yeah.
And I think he kind of took that project over. And the first kind of game that he really got his hands on as a director was Fire Pro Wrestling Special, I believe is the name of the game. And that game is famous for having a intensely dour storyline where you play as a wrestler working his way up the ranks, and at the end, you become so disillusioned with the industry that you take your own life. And so that was a surprisingly dark story for a wrestling game at the time, where it's just like the bulk of the game is just like you put two guys in a wrestling ring and they throw each other around. But that was a game that went dark in a lot of ways.
Imagine if like the new NFL like career modes at the end, it's just like, I'm done with this, no more for me.
Yeah, I think there's a series of extenuating circumstances that escalate, but I actually haven't played the game. I have heard. I think I have a copy of 3, but. There's definitely a lot of famously weird stuff in that game.
As Suda tells it, just to show gamers, they've never changed. Apparently, when they did this, the internet was in its early periods, so instead they got a bunch of postcards and letters from fans who were fucking furious. And they would just get boxes of these letters from people being like so pissed at them for this suicide plotline. So gamers, they've always been freaks.
Yeah, so is Suda, to be fair. From there, he goes. I believe he works. I forget if these are all in a directorial capacity, but he goes on to direct like the Moonlight and Twilight Syndrome games, which are kind of these visual novels that kind of are in a similar vein as Killer 7 to some degree, and a lot of the the late 90s 2000s kind of very like edgelordy strain of like Japanese video games, where there are a lot about murders and like they're very interested in the idea of like let's see what kind of messed up crap we can depict in a video game kind of thing. And so eventually he goes off and kind of does his own thing and founds Grasshopper Manufacture, which they kind of see as like a very punk independent outfit, which there weren't a ton of independent developers at the time. And so like their first game is The Silver Case, which is again another kind of visual novel that has a lot of references to Moonlight and Twilight Syndrome, but is set in its own world and has a very similarly like very cynical storyline, but is like pretty good. It's like you can tell that game was made by someone who is very invested in graphic design, because there's a lot of like weird and cool interface stuff going on with how the game presents like what is essentially a visual novel. And then they're like from there he just starts making weird games like Flower, Sun, and Rain. And so I think there is also like a very conventional string. Like Grasshopper is also responsible for like Shining Force 2, and like there's a series of like later on action games that are based on like things like Samurai Champloo and Blood Plus, which is like an anime that was around at the time. But there was definitely like there ends up being a strain of like there are Suda games and there are non-Suda games. And like the Suda games tend to be also weird but kind of more conventional. But there is also, it's sort of like now where you see like in Double Fine, there will be a strain of like, this is Tim's project, or like this is like a Lee Petty thing, or like this is a project that we funded, right? So there are kind of those two concurrent lines of development. And eventually he makes Michigan Report from Hell, which is not from what I've heard, a very good photo taking game in the vein of what's that horror series where you take photos of ghosts?
Fatal Frame.
Yeah, it's sort of like that.
Pokemon Snap.
That's right. A Pokemon Snap like. And so Killer7 comes about because Capcom is under the gun for the Capcom 5, which is kind of their slate of GameCube exclusive video games. I think one of which is canceled, one of which is Resident Evil 4, one of which is product number 3. Yeah, and there's one other
Beautiful Joe,
and
baby.
Beautiful Joe from Clover, and then Killer7, which was kind of an interesting thing, because I think Shinji Mikami kind of sought Suda out for that, of like, we are looking for games that are cool and Japanese and weird to put on this GameCube console. Give me some pitches. And so he basically shows them he has all these ideas for video games, and then one of them is just like, here's this art style that the GameCube is very good at rendering, this very cel-shaded, simple colors art style, and he's like, that I want that one. I don't know what the rest of that pitch is. I want whatever looks like that.
Yeah, can we talk about the Capcom 5 for a minute,
Jacob,
because it's so interesting.
I would love to. One of my secret dream projects is the oral history of the Capcom 5. It is one of the craziest things I've ever heard that like Capcom completely bungled for Nintendo.
Right. Yeah, but they have, I mean, so it's like, you know, basically the take, and Blake, correct me if I'm wrong here, is like Capcom is like, we need new blood. Like, we're not like an exciting company anymore, and so we're going to kind of like do interesting new stuff.
I think it was more like a reaction to the game industry at large at that time as well. Like, they kind of felt that, and maybe I don't know if they meant overall or just specifically in Japan, but they felt like there was a game industry stagnation at that point. And at the time, Nintendo going up against what would be, you know, the PS2 and later the Xbox, though the Xbox is pretty much a non-factor probably for Capcom in terms of competition. They wanted a slew of exclusives for the GameCube, and then, you know, that birthed this partnership with Capcom. The Capcom was going to create these 5 tentpole games, these 5 like big hitters that were only going to come to the GameCube, and that did not end up being the case for all of them except one, if you don't count the one that was released. I don't think P&O3 ever came to anything else. But
it's so, I mean, I just want to read, this was like a statement on their website at the time. Capcom said, "We believe that the regression of excitement is solely the fault and responsibility of we creators. By the same token, we believe it is also our mission and responsibility to create something that is worth seeing, quote unquote, for the user. In a market that has become prosaic, prosaic. With character-dependent games and sequel games, we would like to take this opportunity to announce 5 new and exciting games for the GameCube. It's just like, one, it's weird to hear them be like, okay, yeah, it seems like games have been like sucking and that's our fault, but like we're gonna make them better. And two, it's like they were saying this in like 2001.
Yeah,
it's like when you look at the games that came out in 2001, it's like, what are you talking about?
What's interesting about the Capcom 5 though, because I feel like a lot of people talk about it as kind of a failure, which it largely was, because those games did not end up being exclusives for
a failure in a business sense,
which,
but I think almost for my money, they were overwhelmingly like successful creatively. The idea that like, hey, we need to inject new blood into the game industry. One of the games we were thinking about for this initiative is Resident Evil 4, like the continuation of one of our tentpole franchises.
I sometimes think the failure like overshadows Resident Evil 4 notwithstanding, like the impact of the Capcom 5. If you discount again P&O3 and Dead Phoenix, the canceled game, like Beautiful Joe would like snowball into us getting platinum, right? Because Clover was working on that. Okami was around at the same time, but wasn't part of the Capcom 5. Killer7, I hadn't really thought about this until yesterday, was such a like landmark game for indie developers that would come like 10 years later. Like the Hotline Miami devs are like huge outspoken Suda fans. More recently, Neon White, of course. I think just Grasshopper in general was such like a big influence on developers that would come within the first and second indie boom. And it all starts kind of in Killer7 being Grasshopper's first big American release that like caught the eye of a lot of people being like, what the fuck is this weirdo game? Which I'm still saying in 2023. Yeah. And the Resident Evil 4, we don't need to belabor the point on that.
Yeah, not a notable game in many ways.
Yeah.
I was going to say, but like they make 2 of Suriel's top 5 games of all time?
Yeah, basically,
Capcom 5. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and the other thing is that like they're both like shooters where you like stop and shoot. So it's like maybe I'm just really into the idea of not moving while shooting.
Well, look, here's the thing also worth bringing up that I found out playing Killer7 about the parallels between the games and the Capcom 5. Famously, early in Resident Evil 4, you stumble upon a woman's body that has been impaled through the head with a what do you call those?
A pitchfork?
A pitchfork. And Leon rather tastelessly says, wow, guess there's no sex discrimination here.
Yeah, until they the woke mob made them take it out of the remake.
Very early in Killer7.
Yeah.
I don't recall the exact line, but basically the exact same joke is made in Killer7. They say no sex discrimination, which made me wonder if that was like a weird inside joke going on. Like it feels like too much of a coincidence that they would make the same shitty joke in these games released for the same thing. And Shinji Mikami helped out on the story, so there you go. Who's to say?
Yeah, this is a weird like dream project for me specifically because it's Shinji Mikami and Suda51 working together, which is an interesting mix that wouldn't happen until around the time Shadows of the Dam came out. But yeah, it's an interesting like kind of look into here's where people's sense of humor was around like. I feel like there were a lot of comedians making that same kind of joke around the time. Like if you ever watched anything with like Carlos Mencia, where he's like, I'm like an equal opportunity offender kind of thing, right? Where that kind of like very edgelordy, like I'm gonna like try to like push the boundaries, but I'm really just kind of enforcing the status quo, but I'm doing it in like a more like quote unquote R-rated way. There was definitely a lot of that going around at the time.
Thank God we've moved past that cultural moment.
That's right.
Yeah, I was actually bummed when they didn't have the no sex discrimination joke in the Resident Evil 4 remake. I think they should add that back in.
Yeah.
But I was a little shocked to see that pop back up and be like, what? Why? Why is that popping up in both of these Capcom 5 games?
Okay, so Blake, I want to challenge you here. Can you explain in like the simplest possible terms just what the act of playing Killer7 is like?
Oh my god.
Just like purely mechanical.
It's more or less like an on-rails shooter where you're walking across a set path. You can only go forward and back outside of moments where you choose cardinal directions. You walk into a room, you shoot some enemies, you solve a simple puzzle, and then the big kind of mechanical conceit is you have 6 to 7 different characters you can switch between somewhat on the fly. It somewhat restricts you. Sometimes you can switch between them all. And they all have various powers that will help you with navigation or combat.
Yeah, that's about it. And you hear that and you're like, sounds boring. And then you play it and you're like, kind of, but also kind of, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like when you finally, like, it happens very early on that you realize, because again, the game, almost in a Dark Soulsy way, doesn't want to tell you how to actually play the game in a lot of respects.
Well, until you go into that room with the gimp suit guy, and he's like, here's like, everything in the game.
Yeah.
Right. But like, once I realized it's not just going to open up a quick text thing and I'm going to have to sit through his gibberish for each one, I was like, I'll just figure it out on my own. Games are fun through exploration and discovery. But early in the game, when you start discovering the different characters and like their powers, I think it's like kind of an interesting... I was with you in that I thought it was kind of boring at first until I started experimenting with characters, and I was like, there's more going on here mechanically than I expected.
Suriel, here's a question. You recently did a video on Resident Evil 4 that I thought was really interesting and talking about like the version differences. What are... Have you played like the modern PC release? I assume.
Yeah, that's the one that I played for this. Is I played up to Cloudman in the PC version. So
one thing that I was struck by immediately was playing this on a controller is so hard. And I played with a controller enough, so I was like, okay, I think I know what this feels like. And then I switched to a mouse because I just found aiming so difficult. Can you talk about like the original release and I guess like the things they've changed, because also like the character swapping and stuff is different or is streamlined in the PC one?
Faster. Yeah. So in the PC version, you straight up have hotkeys and you can swap among the characters by just pressing, the number keys, which is instant. Like it actually like kind of breaks the flow of it a little bit, because you're not supposed to be able to like, you're supposed to go into the menu, select the personality from the menu, and then swap there. But in the PC version, because you can just press, 5 for Cone or like 4 for Coyote, depending on the level, it's like you just instantly activate that really cool transition where the character turns into pallets of blood and explodes and then becomes the next character. So a lot of it, it's like it is more efficient in like, to parallel a lot of the stuff that I said in that Resident Evil 4 video, where like it is better and improved because a lot of it is easier, but then it kind of flattens a lot of that game, because it's like if the shooting is too easy, it almost kind of is beside the point. Like what you mentioned about it's a lot harder on the controller. Like there's more tension, right? And so like when you're playing it on PC, you definitely don't have as much like kind of fear of these enemies. And there are specifically bosses later on that definitely are meant to test your ability to aim. Like we'll talk about the boss at the end of the second level and how that one is significantly different when you're playing on a controller. The end of Sunset. But aside from that, like there's widescreen and it runs at a more consistent frame rate. And there's like some graphical differences where I think like the scanning, there's supposed to be like a kind of a bit of static that comes over the screen that I don't think the PC version captures as well. But besides that, it feels like this art style, I feel like is both a moment in time and has aged really, really well, because I think it looks really, really good. But in terms of version differences, there are definitely some, but I don't think it's like as vast as something like Resident Evil 4, I think.
Yeah. I think the game, just to echo that, I think the game looks fantastic. I mean, a lot of that is aesthetic, and then a good portion of it is just like it is rezzed up to, look good on modern machines. What bums me out, and let me know if y'all had the same issue or if it's something I need to go in the menus and fix, or the anime cutscenes look fucking terrible.
Oh yeah, they run at like 360p.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's just what they have. I'm guessing they don't have like the original masters for whatever that is, but yeah.
It's such a bummer because they look like they're beautiful, but like I'm watching it through, like it looks like I'm like underwater or some shit trying to watch a TV.
I mean, they truly look so much like you were watching old Gorillaz music videos
Yeah.
on YouTube before they had HD. Like, the art style is really, and I don't say that negatively, because I think the Gorillaz music videos are, like, really cool looking, but it's, like, it's this kind of version of animation, this, like, early CG, but because they're doing it cell-shaded, it doesn't look like shit, you know, like, it looks really interesting, but it's also just so low quality. And I mean, I looked up the CGI cutscenes were made by a company called Digital Frontier. That's a production company in Japan, and their list of everything they've worked on is just bananas. It's like, you know, Metal Gear Solid 4, Metal Gear Rising, Smash Bros, all of the Yakuza games since 4, basically. So it's like they are well known, but watching these, you're like, there's clearly so much craft. I wish I could see it through the pixels.
Yeah. Did you all notice in the main menu, depending on the difficulty you select, the tempo of the song changes?
Yeah.
It's really cool.
It is cool.
It's just a really cool thing that happens.
Like, and what you mentioned about Suda being a graphic designer is very clear here, because you see, like, even from the beginning, the way it uses, like, even just the opening kind of titles, or not even like the logo sequences, right? And immediately it interrupts them with, like, the smile, laugh, and the screen turning red when you're on the Grasshopper logo in Capcom. Like, that's very much, and like the way all the menus shift, and like the lettering on stuff, and the way you select levels by, like, shooting your target in the interface. It's all very, like, they have thoroughly thought about every interactive aspect of this game in a way that a lot of games take for granted.
Like, I feel like, obviously, this is not this is a case-by-case basis. There are plenty of new games that come out that have a sense of style, but, like, I feel like they stand out more because games lack sense of style so often. Yeah. Like, you think of just, like, any run-of-the-mill AAA game, like Last of Us Part 2, does not have style in terms of its, like, menus. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're just kind of, like, black and white text. And so when you play a game like this that's almost 20 years old, or, of course, the Atlas games coming out, where they have such strong, like, graphic design direction in their menus and their presentation, it just, like, it hits, like, a ton of bricks. I wish more games had this, but, like, 20 years ago, it looks better than a lot of current games.
It really makes, I think, the neon white comparison that you made at the beginning is clear, because it's like when you're playing neon white, you look at the HUD and it's like, why is all this shit here? Or where it says, like, white, a damned soul confined to heaven to kill demons at the bottom. It's like, why would there be this text? But, like, when you were just looking at the screen of neon white, it is so much more visually interesting. And that is here where it's like, it's not, the goal here is not, like, perfect practicality and functionality.
Oh, definitely
it's
not.
Like, it's not, because it's not like it, like, shows you really clearly how much health you have. You know, the health bar is like this eye that, like, opens and closes depending on the amount of damage you've taken. And so it's all just like, it is cool first and functional kind of like fourth or fifth.
I think that's why you don't see a lot of games like this, because I think the common practice for, like, UI and UX is to, like, make it, like, seamless and make it, like, because in menus, like, people don't see menus as, like, a premier destination in video games, right? It's like, I'm here for a specific purpose and then I'm out. And so, like, and you still see, like, I remember there was that announcement from, like, the big, huge new RPG from the Persona team, and it had this, like, wild looking interface for, like, the menus and stuff, which is, you know, typical of that company. But I did definitely see, like, tweets of, like, oh man, I can't read this at all. I have no idea what's going on here, which is sometimes seen as, like, this negative about, like, if I can't read the menus well and access them or use them efficiently, then that is, like, bad UI design. But I think, and this ties into my larger argument of why I love this game so much, is that it understands that everything is narrative design, and it's just, it is using every component of its interactivity to like impart a feeling and say, like, we have a statement we want to make about this specific thing. And it's like innate throughout this game that everything is part of, like, for as nonsensical as the story can often be, it feels like every decision this game is making is, like, tied to a coherent, like, a statement that they are trying to make.
Here's an aspect of kind of narrative and mechanical design that I did not expect from this game at all, is it has what feels like almost roguelike elements,
A corpse
or
run,
like
yeah.
a kind of, or maybe souls, yeah, souls things where. So you've got these characters, like many different that you can switch between, which are confusingly, they are aspects of like one person's personality, right? Like that's the kind of idea is like you're playing 7 different versions. But one can die, and that does not game over. And instead, what you have to do is select one of these guys who everyone has their little voice clips on the screen, and his is just "I'm a cleaner," and he is, because you then have to run back to the place where you died, and he like picks up the corpse, and then you can revive that player, which is. I just think of as like such an interesting and kind of modern mechanic, you know, through Demon Souls or whatever. And I was just like, I was really surprised to see that, especially in this game, which often feels so on rails, that this is like a really, I don't know, just like a creative way of approaching things, even though it is hard and annoying sometimes, especially because the cleaner guy has an incredibly weak gun, and it can be really hard to get back.
Yeah, you're not supposed to use him in regular combat, right? Like you, when you are doing that corpse run, you feel vulnerable because like you want to get that personality back and revive them, and all the other personalities are so much better than Garcian at killing. So he's like in a way the medic, but he is the character that you interact with the most outside of like the gameplay, right? Like he is the character that is in all of the cutscenes. They all focus on him.
Yeah.
Who's your all's favorite Smith? All their last names are Smith, by the way, dear listener.
I think narratively I like Garcian. The one that I end up using most is Cone, because he is the fastest, and he has like he kind of gives you the most leeway because he has the dual pistols and they fire twice.
Right.
Which makes it easy to hit weak points.
Dan has, when you upgrade him, he can get a triple shot. Like a lot of the characters have double shot, but Dan has a triple shot, which I find very, very useful. But he's like the most boring. It's like my favorite is definitely the woman. I just think she's like the coolest looking, and her skill is so ridiculous, but I do really enjoy when they do it.
I mean she has two, like every character has like two skills that are like, one of them is for combat and one of them is for puzzle solving, and like hers is like, her combat skill is like she has a scope, right? And this is where the Killer7 gun from Resident Evil 4 comes from. It is her gun. But like her other powers, like if there's blood on the wall or like some sort of barrier, this like this is the BDSM avatar of her is gonna come out, and she's gonna like wave her hand and destroy like the blood or absorb it and like cause the scene to change. It's very cool.
Well, is that what's, I mean, because my take on what was going on is she was like slitting her wrists.
She does that
because it's like, okay, yeah, because it's this like shower of blood. Okay, yeah.
It depends on what you're using it for.
She's my favorite as well. She got the scope that's real good. When you go over her character select, she says, "What the fuck are you looking at?" It sounds really cool. I'm just a big fan of her.
Those quotes change also depending on the level.
Really?
Because like in the first level, she says like, "I changed my makeup." Did you notice?
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then so every time, like I think there's a limited number. I don't think it's like on a per level basis, but they do change between levels, and all the characters' outfits, like the color scheme of their outfits change between levels too. And like there is an attention to detail here that feels like both limited, because it's not like they're wearing completely different clothes, but it's like it's enough to that you know that all the outfits are different, but it's like they find every possible avenue to do something interesting, and they just go for it, and which is in opposition to a lot of the stuff that this game does mechanically, where it's like, oh, what possible order could you be lighting these candles in, and all the candles are literally numbered in the order that you're supposed to put them. It's like not, and like they give you hints for most of like the big puzzles, so they're not like too intricate at all,
which I appreciate. Just letting me kind of, like that. It's like this game was made with the idea that I would have to be playing it on a work basis in a very truncated amount of time. Suda was like, let's just give him the fucking solutions.
Another element of characterization I love is I think their barks are so perfectly like short and memorable without getting annoying, because it's so easy to have just a thing that a character says over and over in a video game to get annoying immediately. And just for some reason, I don't find them annoying in this. And I think it's I think it's coyotes who, when you so you shoot at enemies, they have a weak point where if you can hit that weak point, you just kill them in one hit, and when you hit that critical spot, I think that's usually where they say like their thing. But Coyote just being like, "You're fucked," is just like, it's just so good, and I never get tired of hearing him say that.
I think the only character who can't hit criticals is Mask, because he just has grenade launchers, and that's kind of the trade-off you're making with him, is that you have this big AoE blast, but you're not going to get the extra blood that you get from hitting critical points.
Mask sucks so bad. Every time I have to play as him, I'm like, what am I not getting? He reloads so slowly, and I can't hit critical.
So the only reason to switch to him is when you're fighting the giants. Just switch and use his special move, and it takes them out really quick. You don't have to aim for their eye. Otherwise, I wouldn't use him at all.
Yeah, I don't use Kevin a lot either, which is interesting. I like I don't know if it's intentional, but it seems intentional from Suda to have the one character named Kevin Smith be the silent character.
I didn't even think about that. Is Kevin the knife man?
Yeah, he's the one who fires knives and can turn invisible and go through wires and stuff.
Yeah, I don't use him much unless I don't want to fight an enemy. Then I'll go invisible and sneak past him.
Yeah, he's also good for taking care of those giant smiles because you can just run past them.
Yeah. Good point.
Or with the giants, what I found is you can just run up to them until they make a noise, and then they start falling over, and you just turn around and run backwards, and so you don't have to fight
so it's
them
like
at all.
it's. I think the intended way is that you're supposed to use Kate's scope to hit their eye before they get to you, but that is by far the hardest way to deal with those characters, is to just snipe them before they get to them.
I actually learned a dummy's way to do it is if you wait until they're right on you before their fall animation, they'll look straight down at you and open their eye, and it's so close that it's just an easy shot. So that's how I was doing it.
That's a risk, yeah.
That's how I was doing it yesterday, but I was going through them.
Suriel, if you know the answer to this, don't say it. Blake, do you know why they all have the last name Smith?
Yeah, because he loves the Smiths, the band.
Yeah.
That is why.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of like practical elements of like, we're just making all this stuff because we have to, because like the focus of the game is the art style and what's the best way to present it, and like there's just a lot of aesthetic references thrown in there, like it being called the Smiths, and like when you kill an enemy with a critical, they'll just say all you need is blood, or like things like that, where they're just constantly inserting pop culture references in a way that doesn't feel that feels like, okay, we thought of this thing and we're putting it here.
Just see the Basic Instinct reference late in the game. It's a real good one where Samantha is having sex with the old man, and she sits down, does the Basic Instinct thing, and I was like, I see it. I see it. I saw what you're doing here, Suda.
It's interesting where I almost feel like it's kind of full circle, where I guess theoretically, if you play a game now and it has a lot of contemporary references, you're like, okay, these are funny. If you play a game from like 5 years ago that has a bunch of references, you're kind of like, this is like cringe. Like the kind of, in like Watch Dogs, when they put like very old memes on the billboards, and you're just like, oh god, why are they doing this? But now that this game is like 20 years old, the references are almost like charming again. You know, it's like I like seeing the references to other like 20, 30-year-old media.
An interesting point to that though is like, Suda claims, I'm not Suda, I can't say whether this is true or not, that there is like an intention, I guess it doesn't claim, like implies there's a intentionality behind him doing that, which I don't know. You just named your character Smith because you like the band The Smiths. But there was an interview in that the Killer7 book with him where they're like, hey, people think this game's influenced by Kill Bill, and he like gets really up in arms about it. He's like, what the fuck? No. And they're like, well, it has, Kill Bill has anime scenes. This has anime scenes. And he's like, no, that's stupid. And then he says the hardest thing a developer could ever say, where he was like, I like movies, of course, but I don't hold games in such contempt that I would just blindly mimic them. Which, personally, I think a lot of developers could learn from.
Hideo Kojima.
I was going to say the same about Neil Druckmann. I'm just like, we were not. Yeah. He just hit that guy's weak point, and he just evaporated into a plate of blood.
Which, I don't know, maybe he doesn't see, like, I guess references, aren't necessarily mimicking something. And this game does feel like very distinct visually and like narratively from like even the things he's pulling from. But I thought it was funny that he was just like, don't fucking compare me to movies. I'm a game maker, and that's what I want to do.
Yeah, I think it also reveals like this game is, because it is so distinct, it kind of reveals how much of like art can be this mix of like pragmatism and interpretation, where like even the basic there was an interview with him in Kama Sutra a long time ago where he talks about how the fact that you're moving on rails is kind of a concession to the Japanese audience, which at the time was seen as being averse to shooters. I don't know how true it was.
Yeah.
But like you hear about, for example, there was when Half-Life 2 made it to Japan, it was like the most popular form was as an arcade game, where that basically turned it into a light gun shooter, where like you would step out and like you would move forward automatically, and like you would just step out to peek out and like shoot opponents with a gun. And so I think they had like reservations about we want to make a shooter, but we're kind of afraid that like the Japanese audience doesn't click with shooters and won't know how to like necessarily like move and shoot at the same time. So they just said like, okay, what if you just like if we took care of most of the movement, and then just had you like kind of make it easier to control by doing stop and pop effectively, where you can't move and shoot at the same time. And how that ends up to me feeling like, along with all the like how easy the puzzles are, and like saying like, oh yeah, like in most games, like it's beside the point how like the fact that you have full control over your movement is kind of besides the point, because you're just going to go down the hallway, you're just going to go straight, and you're going to go off in the spokes that we design. So there's really no point into like you having more agency than this. Or like, yeah, you're going to get through the puzzle, so it's like beside the point that like we just want you to use the puzzles as a way to traverse the level, right? And so it almost feels like a deconstruction of video games in that like this part of it, the design stuff, almost seems like perfunctory, and like we have a goal of showing you this art style and doing cool stuff, and the game design is like how we're going to do that. But it ends up like, I wouldn't say that the shooting is beside the point, because that is the central mechanic, but it almost feels like, yeah, we're just doing this because we need to. And so we're going to all like to some degree kind of say like, what is the bare minimum that we can do here? But it feels so like it has this really strong intent of like, this game stands out because of all of these practical decisions that they made.
Do you think it's a reasonable comparison to compare this to Metroid Prime? Because in both games, I was thinking about how it's interesting that in this game, before you shoot anyone, you have to do this scan mechanic, which is very basic, but it's just like the enemies are invisible until you stop and hit the scan button, and then they show up. And then you can lock onto them, or you can free aim and you can shoot them. And it's like Metroid Prime's whole thing was like, what if we made a first-person shooter, but it was like about scanning, And when you're moving around, you basically don't have to aim at all. It just seems like these games trying to figure out like in a public that does not know how to move and aim at the same time.
Yeah.
How do we do this? Like, how do we figure it out?
It seems like even then, around that time, it felt like the kind of the writing was on the wall that like, oh, shooters are going to be the thing. And I think there was almost this undercurrent of like, how can we implement shooting, like first person mechanics, and to kind of convince people who are into shooters to play other kinds of games? Because I think both Metroid Prime and Killer7 feel like they're essentially adventure games where where you have like this like novel shooting mechanic thrown in and kind of like, fully implemented, and it's not like a byproduct or anything, but it's like Killer7 plays like, here's an adventure game where you're like the design of the levels is like, go here, collect this item, and then put it in this key, and then kind of see a cutscene and watch extended cutscenes, and like use these abilities of like, oh, how can you possibly get through this hole in the ceiling? You have to switch to a character and use their key ability, right? But then it's like, okay, for those action game freaks, we have this shooting mechanic, right? So it almost feels like it's them trying to say like, let's try to make an adventure game, but also make it a shooter.
Yeah, it almost feels like an adventure game, but you get to play some Virtua Cop in the middle.
Yeah, that's basically it. And yeah, and all that stuff just makes it feel now of like, man, there is just like no other game like this.
It's true, but I think that's like what makes it so great. I don't know, I'm probably just preaching to the choir. It's like how heavily authored it feels, and the fact I can't go play Killer 8 makes it like I'm just immediately so smitten by it. It's like, this is just its own fucking standalone thing, and it exists on its own island, because like, I don't know, the dude that made it claims he went on media blackout for 3 years and didn't watch any movies or play games, and like tried to make a game that in every respect was not like any other games. And it's like, I think in a lot of cases he kind of nailed it, which is crazy because otherwise those platitudes would seem very stupid.
Yeah,
but...
and it's interesting because it's like one thing, the reason I linked you to that book that is like Killer7, which is like one of several attempts to kind of flesh out the story of Killer7, because a lot of the narrative content of this game was cut kind of through production because they needed to. And so like there is like prequel comics that are, the canon of which is kind of up in the air, but they made some attempts to kind of clarify a lot of the story stuff, and there are like, there's that book, but like a lot of it is hard to like really parse in a lot of ways, and that almost makes it more interesting as a game where it's like if there was like a Killer7 remake that said like we're going to integrate all of that cut story stuff in, it would almost feel like that would make it less weird and less distinct as a result. So part of it is like every time someone's tried to like do something, because like Killer is Dead is effectively was pitched in part as like we're trying to do Killer7 again, and that game is not very good for a lot of reasons of like we wanted to make a more traditional action game, etc. But yeah, it's hard to point people to like, if I like Killer7, what other games can I play? And there's really only a handful of games that like really kind of hit that mark. As a quick aside, though, you can play Killer 8 is a mode you unlock when you beat the game, and it's a harder version of the game.
Of course. Can I make another strained comparison, Blake? Suriel, what you just said reminded me of a movie that even after being in high school, I love, called Donnie Darko.
Interesting.
And you may not have heard of this film. But the thing about Donnie Darko is that there is this director's cut that a lot of people consider kind of like the director is like, oh, I wish this stuff had been in the movie. And when you watch that, you realize that it is not a kind of weird fantasy film. It's a sci-fi story poorly told. And it's like adding all the context makes the story much less interesting. And so I do think that it is these like huge gaps in understanding that Killer7 lets you exist with, where it's like, maybe if we knew everything that was happening, this story would not be nearly as evocative. But, because we're just trying to be like, what the hell is going on here? I can kind of fill it in with the most interesting possible version in my head. Yeah,
it reminds me of the Miyazaki quote where he talks about like the way he tells stories in Dark Souls games. He does that because he's not confident that he would be able to tell a good version of that story in the traditional way. So by kind of doing it in a different way, he's able to kind of obfuscate that stuff. And and that speaks to kind of what, like, another thing that this game, like, watching it for the first time in like 2009, I think, or 2010, definitely kind of solidified to me the idea of like something like Death of the Author, where it's like, it doesn't matter what the intent of the author was going into the piece of work, like the process is the art.
Yeah.
And so like the fact that they had to cut all of this stuff out makes it like that, making it weirder kind of goes to show that like, yeah, like the artist is responsible for the piece of art, but like the thing that you get is almost more important than whatever they thought about. Like, well, this was what we were planning to do. Right.
Jacob, 2023 is almost over. What's game of the year?
Oh, Blake, there are so many options. I mean,
wrong. It's Alan Wake 2.
That actually scared me.
Like, Alan Wake 2 is going to scare the shit out of you, which we talked about a lot on our spoiler cast, only on Nebula.
It's true. We've done these spoiler casts for a couple games that we just like can't stop talking about in our personal life. We did it with Resident Evil 4 earlier this year. And this time we got Mike Mahardy from Fire Escape Cast to come on and give us all his literary thoughts on Alan Wake. And we gave him some back.
That was great for me because I've never read a book before. And now I know several books I might read.
That's true. That episode is only available on Nebula, which you can join by going to nebula.tv/somethingrotten. And Blake, you know what happens when people join using that code?
I show up to their house and give them a little kiss on the forehead.
That's true, because they gave you money. You get that money.
That's true.
So if you like Alan Wake, and you also want to give this show a little cash so we can keep going, keep making great content like this, go to nebula.tv/somethingrotten.
Conversely, if you want to stop hearing ads like this, go to nebula.tv/somethingrotten, and you don't have to hear these fucking ads anymore.
Yeah, you win either way.
I'm tired of the modern world, Jacob.
Oh, I can't wait to hear where this is going.
Everything is just like designed to be cheap and break after one use. It's all plastic, and it all just kind of sucks, and I just end up throwing it away. Except for this one thing.
Blake, if this is about Gundams...
Except for these two things. I'm talking about my Henson Razor, Jacob, the sponsor of this podcast. See, unlike everything else in my life, this is solid. It's metal. It's designed to stick around. And here's the wildest thing. Henson Shaving is also an aerospace parts manufacturer. I didn't know that until reading this right now. They're making and engineering their razors with the same kind of quality and precision. Do you know about the diving board problem, Jacob?
I absolutely do not.
So, all right, hear me out. So razor blades are like diving boards. If they stick out further, they wiggle more. And this wiggle is what causes cuts and razor burn and all that stuff you don't want on your face or other parts. But Henson razors are so engineered they only stick out 0.0013 inches, which means the blade doesn't wiggle at all, and so the shave is super smooth. The thing is like the stiffest diving board ever. This analogy, it works.
That's good. You're telling me it's good.
It's good! You can get one of these razors, which is also long-term and affordable and a sustainable way to shave, with a free box of blades by going to hensonshaving.com and using the promo code ROTTEN. Hey, free box of blades. That's pretty rotten, huh?
Blake, I have to tell you, I was just kidding about all those questions I asked. I have a Henson razor, and I love it. It's so nice. hensonshaving.com, promo code ROTTEN.
So, to talk specifically about the story and the levels we played, I'll say, in terms of what's going on in the game's story, I kinda only barely know. In terms of what the game seems to be saying, I feel like I'm following along a lot better, and it's weird, right? Because it's a game about like the past. At that point, what would it have been? 60 years of America and Japanese is like political relationships with each other, and the way it explores the breakdown of that is really fascinating. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not what I expected. Like, I expected this to just be some, like, gritty neo-noir, and instead you get, like, Suda's thoughts on theoretical geopolitics.
There's, like, another thing that makes this feel very much like an early 2000s game is, like, boy, there's a lot of talk about the UN. You know, the UN as, like, this really powerful decision-making entity, which I feel like for the past... at least 10 years, maybe 15. It's like, haven't heard a lot of people talking about like how the UN is influencing global politics, but here it is like a major player.
Yeah.
It feels like, I mean, granted, it came out, I guess, 5 years later, but it feels like, in some ways, a response to 9/11.
A lot of talk about terrorism.
Exactly. Yeah. So the beginning of this game talks about like how in an effort to like end world terrorism, the UN, like all these countries came together to create this like big agreement, and they did that by like, as far as I'm concerned, making life like considerably worse for people. Like rather than have the TSA, they just end air flight entirely for citizens. Which I'm like, okay, that's fucking like, you've just made the world so much smaller for all its citizens. Like, it's almost like these drastic steps that like have direct parallels to the real world. Like we now have the annoyance of going to the TSA, but in their version, it's like you can't just get on planes anymore because one person might hijack it out of 300 million. You know,
it's such a good beginning. Just like making a setting and having you be like, wait, what? Where it's just like the world ended terrorism. How did that happen?
And you're like, great, I can't believe that's good, but it's how did you do it? Oh, you know, like there's definitely a statement being made when you're like, the way that we got rid of terrorism was like indefinitely grounding all flights, and instead I think what would be simpler is if there was just an enormous bridge connecting every nation across the water, and then like that way no one could hijack a flight and like, you know, hit one of the twin towers.
To do a terrorist act on a bridge. That couldn't happen.
I also like, I think this game is not like the most vicious indictment of America, but I also don't think it's a glowing endorsement of the country. And I think one of America's big structural failings is in its highway system, rather than like train systems or anything better. I don't know. And so it's very funny that this game's solution is like, let's make literally the worst idea possible for traveling the world.
Definitely now something that Elon Musk would come up with of like, oh, what if we just made water highways, you know, like, and so like, yeah, there's definitely a lot there, like where he is hinting at stuff and not necessarily like throughout a lot of the game, he's not necessarily like deeply exploring that, but there is a very clear through line of like frustration with like Japan's national policy of like we don't have a standing army, we have a self-defense force, right? And how like he's exploring a lot of the dynamics between the US and like Japan in a way that like was not a thing that you saw a lot of then, of like games wading into geopolitics outside of like Hideo Kojima games and like stuff that now would be seen as, oh, this game is so political, right? And like this game is just, you hear some guy's thoughts, like kind of half-baked in a lot of parts about, you know, Japanese American geopolitics.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also, in some fucking, it has to be unintentional ways, a little ahead of its time, because like the Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida, right now, it's like one of his big things is like rebuilding an army over there or something. So it's like it did come around where it's like, well, that's kind of what I guess Suda said he wanted in a way. Like it almost feels like a game examining like whether or not, I don't know, let me know if I'm out of pocket here, if Japan has an inferiority complex on the world scale, because it's like there's this idea that America was protecting Japan or rebuilding after the war, and then America, like the idea of the game is like America decides to stop that, and then Japan has no way to defend itself as a nation. And it's almost like this game feels like, in some small ways, I don't think this is the broad conceit of the story, but like Suda being like, we're fucked up, we're too weak, which I don't know. I don't necessarily like any country exploring that, because it feels like
there's definitely like a nationalist kind of sentiment to that you know, I'm not versed in Japanese politics, but it definitely feels like I have heard kind of some strain of that being very hyper conservative and like very like not super great when people are like, yeah, let's kind of defend our own turf, like at the cost of like, you know, kicking out outsiders and stuff. And but like this game is like wrestling with that, and I don't know that it always comes out like with a strong sentiment, but it feels like the fact that the game is even approaching that, I think is like one of its more rotten in a way aspects of just like we're gonna deal with quote unquote real shit,
and
right?
Also like the subtext of it is rotten, where maybe Suda has, I don't want to say the dude's a nationalist, but like you just said, Suriel, like there is like little undercurrents of like these nationalist ideas that have been adopted over the last few decades about like how we need to rebuild Japan as like this like military megaforce that I think does not have great intentions in a lot of cases, the same way like dudes in America that are like, we'll put a boot up your ass,
right, are
also like awful fucking people, you know? So it's like, it's a little weird in that respect.
And it's kind of struggling with that, because there's like, yes, like the nationalist strain of like, you know, we are weak and we need to implement fascist you know, ideology to be strong, is like definitely like not super great. But then there's also like when they hint at like, yeah, America's a little bit imperialist, it's like, yeah, not wrong.
yeah.
Well, and just the central conceit of the game, which is that like in order to maintain and honestly, Suriel, I would love for you to do just like some place setting in the story after I say this, because it would be very helpful for me. But essentially, like, to maintain this terrorism-free world, what you need is just an elite force of assassins who can go anywhere and kill anyone with impunity. You know, that what you're playing as is just like a vigilante force that is funded by the government, ? That is just like, you know, it's essentially the question that every like critical superhero story asks, of just like, is this good that we just have these people who like are so powerful they essentially can't be controlled, and we just rely on them basically having good intentions, and so we let them go and kill like hundreds of whatever?
Well, and to that point, Jacob, they say they end terrorism, but they don't, right? Because the Killer Smiles come.
Yeah, they haven't
which
stopped,
are a terrorist group, which feels forward thinking in and of itself, because it's like, if America did such a good job in a post 9/11 world of ending terrorism, why am I afraid to go in crowds in America these days? You know, it's like we have I would argue a terrifying terrorist problem in America right now. So it's like, if the game is even wrestling with that idea, it's like, these structures don't actually end terrorism beyond like, I don't know, the surface level view of it.
Where there's definitely like the deterrence being worse than the threat, right? Because it's like, you think about like, 9/11 was an awful kind of one-off event, but like all the things that we did to deal with it, things like, security theater and like the kind of ramping up of like, guns in America. This definitely feels like that was an unfortunate side effect of how we tried to deal with that event. And like here, it's just like, everything is okay as long as we use the like autonomous assassins to make sure we kill the zombie like enemies that have cropped up because of what we've done, like of us trying to tamp down on terrorists, right? And then like also no one gets to fly, and all TV stations are basically like propaganda for the state at this point. But yeah, there's definitely like that. I like the idea that you are viewing this kind of geopolitical story between Japan and America as like the tools that they use to basically kill each other, because like all of your contracts are from a character named Christopher Mills, who's kind of like an agent that's like, hey, we're like, Japan is kind of on the slide trying to recruit you to make sure that it is successful, because like the whole point is that you see like these missiles fire, and they don't know where they're coming from, because one of the things that they did to have world peace is they fired all of the like the nukes and like ICBMs at each other to basically like create a fireworks show.
They just
so
exploded all of them in the air.
It's so sick.
And then like, what are these missiles? And like the kind of conceit of Sunset, like the second level of the game, is that, okay, well, all these missiles are heading to Japan, and so is America going to deploy the fireworks, like basically the intercepting missiles, to secure Japan? And like the fact that that's even a question of like, why wouldn't you do that? Is definitely like this very cynical take on like their relationship, right? Of just like, there is a fear in this game of like Japan kind of subsuming itself to kind of the larger one world government, which is basically what this is doing. Of like, the United Nations is kind of like this funnel for a lot of conspiratorial thinking of like, it's like, the globalist agenda, right? Of just like everyone's going to be subsumed into like one thing, one world theory kind of thing. And like the fact that it's like simultaneously touching on all of these things, but then not necessarily like saying like, here's my final verdict on this thing. And it's a very messy game in a lot of ways, for sure.
I think two things that stand out from this conversation is, one, this being a just like explicit attempt to break into the American market for Grasshopper. This game was made with the American audience in mind, makes the story almost like all the more ballsy. No,
it's insane to be like, this is our big international push. What is the story? Well,
it's about how globalism might be bad, actually. Trying to make things that appeal to everyone simultaneously isn't going to work. I think one thing that's interesting is that we're talking a lot about like what is effectively background noise in a lot of this game, right? Because it's like there is all this stuff you can read into it, but it's like the first level of this game is just you kind of going into a like nondescript like multi-purpose facility and killing an anime angel.
Hell yeah, brother. I think though, and this is like reading interviews that Suda's given over the past almost 20 years about this game, from the early days to even now, that's so refreshing, is when people ask him about the story, he is quick to be like, yeah, it's a political story. Like, these are the ideas I was wanting to explore. Like, he will still unpack that and not try to, like, hide behind it, the way some games do. That I found, like, really refreshing reading interviews where he's like, look, this is what was going on. This is what I want to explore. The game was political as hell, even if maybe not the most coherent or well thought out.
Yeah.
I'm adding that last part. He didn't say that. But I think that's like really refreshing in some of the things he said about the game after release.
And that feels like it would be controversial now for someone to say explicitly, like for like, I think indie developers are probably a little kind of have more leeway to do that. But the idea of like, I remember when like Neil Druckmann made his quote about like, this is a game about, hate and like my kind of background as being Israeli and the kind of how I felt about, seeing a depiction of someone being executed and how that affected me. And like, that was a big statement that a lot of people took a lot of like umbrage with and stuff. But like, this is also one of those things. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the old Suda meme, where it's like there is a tweet, I forget who made it, where they're like, I miss the old, because this was riffing on a Kanye song,
Right.
Where it's like, I miss the old Suda, the Flower Sun and Rain Suda, the Killer7 Suda, and it's like that. This is exactly what that person meant, because you think about Suda now, he's very tame compared to this stuff, which is like super like rotten in, to use your term, whereas now you think about like No More Heroes 3, the last game he came out, it's like, oh, this is just a bunch of cool stuff that I like put together in an interesting way, but it's like, what is this saying about American society? There's not a lot of it there. And so you can kind of see these strains of like, early on he was really like red hot in terms of the stuff he wanted to cover, and now there's definitely the strain of like, he's kind of tempered since then.
I like the line where the guy talks about dudes that jack out 4 times a day. That's such a good line. It's such an evocative moment in the game. The final level I think we should talk about before we close out, because it is like, even though I found it the most mechanically annoying because of those big giant motherfuckers, I think it is the most interesting level, especially from a Japanese lens, taking on like small town America and kind of like the corporatization thereof is like really interesting, and I think he kind of nails it in a lot of respects.
I was just going to say, I mean, structurally, I think it's so interesting because it feels like, we talked about a little, there's so much of this game that had to be cut out. This feels more complete, in that, like, there are like 3 times as many cutscenes in this level as any of the other ones that we played thus far, and they are all really cool. Like, this game isn't like half-assing the cutscenes when they do them. It's like they are interestingly directed. They've got this crazy art style. They have really weird vocal performances, which I love. But it's like, there is so much. This one feels very just like self-contained.
Standalone,
where it's like, here's the whole story. Yeah,
because like this benefits a lot from basically being a break from the main plotline, because the main plotline is like, you're trying to figure out like who has it, like you're trying to basically off members of like the opposing political party from the one who hired you. But like this one is just like, this cult leader in Texas is calling you out effectively to come kill him. And like he tells you like, hey, I have the power of prediction, and like I have used like the Yakumo, you later learn, which is like this almost like what's it called, like the thing where you manifest your own destiny, and you can kind of see it it's like this instructional document that will like, that empowers people almost supernaturally to do whatever they want. And so he gets a hold of it as a mailman in the U.S. Post Office, and he comes to take over this town. And so he's at the end of his rope, you eventually learn, and he tells you like, hey, come kill me. And that is a taunt basically, but then you realize it's like him realizing that you're the only people who are going to be able to kill him. So you kind of, this one off level, you can basically, if you want to show someone Killer7, you can start them here, or the first level. I think that level is also pretty self-contained, and just say like, this is what Killer7 is, and have a self-contained experience that I think is like really well done, in a lot of cases. And like just the line where he's like, oh, he had a Texas Broncos shirt on, and the only people who would wear a Texas Broncos shirt live in Texas, right?
Hell yeah. I thought it was kind of wild. Like you get and you don't really get this in at least the first 2 levels, like these kind of extended cutscenes with just kind of normal people in the town that are offering ideas on, his name is Andre Almeida. Yeah, which is an insane name for a man who's just in deep South Texas. But like, they're offering ideas on the way he's kind of like set up. Oh, what is his company? First Life is the name of it, which is like, you can almost see it. I don't think they're like they're a magazine production company. It's very unclear what they're doing. It's
like it's a conglomerate that I think specializes in medicine, because then you find out that where all of those vaccines have come from is he keeps injecting himself with like the world's worst diseases.
Oh, right, yeah.
And then creates vaccines, and then he just happens to infect himself with the Heaven Smile virus, but then that's the one that can't be cured, and it turns him into a Heaven Smile, and he kind of knows he's becoming zombified, and it says like, well, I need the people who can kill Heaven Smiles to come take me out, because I can't cure this.
It has the best visual gag in the game, maybe after the shooting the anime girl with a Barrett. But there's like, you're going this whole time, you're in this like small west town, and there's this just enormous like corporate skyscraper on the horizon, and you like walk up to that and you finally get in, and they're like, you can choose like 2 doors and go through either door, and then you just get behind it and it's like an old west like cardboard facade, and it just falls down.
Well, that's what I was kind of thinking about, based on like, I think it's the guy in the that you find a guy at some point. I can't remember what store he's in, but he kind of talks. He's a mail carrier, and he kind of talks about what happens. And it was based on like hearing that, I was thinking about the ways it's like, you know, there are a lot of small towns in America where someone like Tesla or Amazon or whoever buys up a lot of land. The idea is they're going to give jobs or whatever. And then whenever the money runs dry on that shit, like they up and leave, and they kind of leave these small towns in ruin, right? Like all the good that may have come from that in a lot of cases is, you could also see in like gold towns or oil towns. Like it's just this thing that's happened throughout history. And that seems to be what this level is getting at, is like this guy who ostensibly was going to come set up this industry here, give a bunch of jobs. It has worked out maybe for some, hasn't worked out for others. But then you just see the whole facade of it fall, and you get this idea that like this town has been left in ruins by this dude who like came preaching of this like utopia. He was going to give this probably Texas town of 500 people. I thought it was like a really fascinating and like prescient thoughts on America from like a guy who does not live here. I was like, which like you don't have to live here to be able to write like very forward thinking and prescient things. But I was like, I feel like he's kind of fucking nailing this like kind of like specific part of our country right now.
Well, here, let me ask you another question about that, which is that I was struck by I could not decide if it was intentional or not racialization, where like you're in this like small Texas town, and Olmeda, the main guy, is like black, and before you meet him in it, you're hearing all these people say things like I don't know why he got to be the guy, kind of like resentful of him succeeding, which in the game makes sense because he did this bizarre, like, he kind of used magic to do it. But also you are essentially listening to like a bunch of like white small town Southerners talk about how they like resent this black guy for having a big business. But also, we are to understand that, like, the business is bad, like, it's, like, hurting things, and honestly, it's just, like, I don't think there are a lot of Japanese games that have accurately done American racial politics. I don't think there are a lot of American games that have accurately done American racial politics, and so it's, like, I was like, was this a choice, or did this just, like, happen, or, like, is there intentionality here?
Well, also, like, when you start the level as Garcian, the first line you hear is an old white guy going, "We don't see a lot of black people around here." And then not very long later, an insane choice for this script is Iwazaru, who is this like gimp guy that's just around explaining the story and the game kind to you at all times, says, "I hate afros. They disgust me."
He sure does say that.
And I was like, you could have cut that. You didn't need that line.
Yeah, and it's like, it's very much like, I think it is messy, but it's like the opposite of ambiguous, right? Where it's like, it's kind of just throwing everything it can at a wall and seeing what sticks. And so you get this overlapping, like, there's a lot of like racial tension here. And I don't think it's an accident that the way you kill Olmeda is by shooting his afro. Yeah. Like that, and that becomes his main weak point, right? And then like that mixed with the whole like pharmaceutical industry and like, savior syndrome and stuff. And like all these things are overlapping. You're not sure like where, like, what am I supposed to think about any of this? It's just lobbing ideas constantly at you.
It's like, okay, well, the US has like done really awful medical malpractice on like black people. And so like having all the vaccines come from like a black guy injecting himself with diseases is interesting, but it's just like, is it just kind of racist? That his weak point is his afro? It's really one of those just like, how much credit should I be giving this versus not?
I think for as like strong as I personally found strong and complete in the ideas of like the industry stuff here. I found that this game had to say. I think the racial politics of it are probably dumb and messy. You know, it's like these two things are not mutually exclusive in the Cloudman level here.
Yeah, totally. Like, but I think that as like art goes, I think it is more interesting if maybe like less, I guess, kind of acceptable to do stuff like this, where it's just like it's messy, and I think this is what everyone tries to avoid when they're like, oh yeah, our game's not political, we don't want to wade into that. Like there's a lot of tension around that.
Yeah, it's like in the Star Wars, the Empire now, they're all super diverse, so like there's no commentary at all.
Right. There's like this hesitance among like, you know, the bigger the corporation, the more hesitant they are, etc. But like there is this like very strong like, well, we don't want to say anything, but we have ideas, and like this is just like, here are all of my ideas. And they're messy as hell, and it's like not always in a good way, but it's like I'm more interested in seeing this kind of stuff than I am for like you know, whatever Call of Duty believes its version of geopolitics is, where it's just like both we want to enforce the status quo, but we also have no statement to make. Please don't ever think that we have aligned ourselves in that we have any opinions, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think to that point, even though there are certainly parts of this game's story that make me bristle a bit, and we'll see.
For sure.
We'll see where, if they land in the second half of this game. I think it's already infinitely more interesting to think about thematically than, like you said, like a Call of Duty, which, to be fair, I enjoy thinking about. We did a whole season about it, and I had tons of thoughts. But I find myself thinking about this more in my off time than a lot of other games that want to, like,
for sure,
posture.
And like the one similarity between this and Call of Duty, which I don't think there are a ton, but like the idea that like the stuff that they kind of just say without intending to is much more interesting than the stuff that they're explicitly trying to talk about, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, this, like, I feel like if nothing else, among the many things I like about this game, is just like, just shoot your shot, like say what you want, and don't feel so afraid of like, you know, people like, you know, kind of trying to like politicize everything. But it's like a good example of just like why I think it's more interesting when games actually make statements, even if I don't agree with them, right?
Yeah.
Now, all this said, I think we've had some great conversations here about the themes of this game and what Suda maybe was thinking about. Thank God no one asked me to explain what's actually happening in the game, because I'm barely certain beyond, like, some missiles are going towards Japan right now. I'm not even really sure who the Killer7 is. All that stuff is beyond me right now.
I cannot wait to finish this game, and then I looked on GameFAQs.com, and there is one of those like 120-page plot breakdowns that I'm like, oh, I can't wait to fucking dig into that shit.
Yeah, there's also the book that I'm waiting to read the rest of, because it seems like it goes just like level by level. Like, here's Suda saying what he was trying to do.
Yeah, and like as much as I like this game, it's like, yeah, you don't necessarily need to understand the story just to get the vibes out of it, even though I find the like the way the game is messy like really interesting.
Yeah.
Like the things you are doing in the game, I think, are just like on a practical level just really cool. Like the, you know, killing the angel, and like here's two politicians' brains being exposed as they like one corrects the other's tie, or like I think like the boss fights in this game are like super interesting because so many of them feel like these one-off ideas where like you know, this boss fight against this assassin is just like, can you shoot them more times than they can shoot you while you're standing still?
I forgot about that.
When that was happening, I was like, what am I supposed to be doing? I was like, am I hitting them in the right place? And then it was like, at the end, it just counts up how many times each of you shot.
So good. And before that, Iwazara tells you, hey, you got to shoot quick. So I switched to the dude with the two guns. And I put like, I had like more than 100 shots over her or something. It was crazy.
And it's like there are a couple of boss fights that feel like more traditional boss fights, and I think to me those are the least interesting ones. But something like Cloudman, where it's just like, if this dude touches you, you die, and you're like in this like amalgam of ambulances like that are strung together, and you're traveling between all of them and trying to like basically get behind this guy in like this weird quasi stealth sequence, and like that stuff that definitely is like the rest of the game.
Yeah.
I'm definitely excited to see like what you guys think of some of the later boss fights, but I really like this game's commitment to just like, we have a lot of cool ideas, and everything mechanically is just kind of in service to all of that.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I mean, it's like I knew we would run long on this episode. We're running a little long, but I just want to kind of say some moments
Hell yeah.
that I thought were so wild, and hear y'all's version. There's that mahjong game that the guys are playing, where at the end they all just shoot each other.
So good.
Yeah, and it's so funny that they're supposed to be the people negotiating, like, hey, are we gonna like save Japan? And it's like 2 Americans and 2 Japanese, and they're playing a game of mahjong, and they all just decide, like, fuck it, we'll all just die here. And that's like a very like cynicism-esque or like circa 2005 kind of thing, where it's like, what if a Mexican shootout just like ended with everyone dead?
Yeah, and then there is it feels almost, when like you hear stories about people watching Akira when they were a kid, where they were like, oh, this is like a cool movie, and then they reach the end and they're like, oh my god, what is happening? the end of that Olmeda level, like, first off, there's the incredible thing where there's just like an endless number of, like, I don't know, volunteers or like cult members, and he just pulls one guy out and he's like, hey, you won, you get to drive this car. And then he puts a guy in like a rocket car just in the middle of the desert, and it takes off, and he basically explains like, his flesh is gonna like rip off his bones. It's like going so fast, he's just gonna like die in this car. And then Olmeda becomes the Akira thing, essentially. It's like he turns into like a monster from The Thing. His head comes off and there's blood fucking spraying everywhere, and what is happening, Suriel? What's going on?
It rains blood from a lacerated sky as well.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of like weird one-off moments, like, Mask headbutting a bullet, or like the fact that the boss fight against Gene DePaul is like as Mask, you're supposed to shoot the ceilings above this guy, but like you could feasibly like end that fight immediately if you know what to do. You can just shoot the thing right above him and kill him instantly. There's just a lot of like, we're gonna do a gag with gameplay that this game is very committed to.
The boss fight against the two, are they the UN guys, the guys who have the top of their head blown off?
They're like from the United Nations party of Japan, so it's very confusing. But it's like it's a Japanese party, but it's like the two kind of heads of it that are kind of trying to that you're trying to stop. And so like
there's just, it's like this motif in the level of these kind of politicians who have been shot in the head and have the top of their head blown off, but they still to like talk and walk around, and their like brain is visible. And your boss fight is against two of them who are throwing their brains at you, and you have to shoot their brains, and then you like mess up. You shoot one of the guy's tie to mess it up, and then the other guy will turn and help him fix his tie, and then you like shoot him in the brain in his head. It's just like, when you put into words what you're doing, it is just so absurd.
Yeah.
They don't make them like they used to, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, and you can talk about, like, whatever the symbolism of any individual moment might be, and try to, like, interpret, like, what does any of this mean? But there's just, it's like, it's almost like the Simpsons thing of, like, Burns's veins, like, the visualization of, like, all of the viruses trying to squeeze through his vein, and how, like, oh, I have all of the diseases, and therefore I am cured of all of them. It's almost pointless to try to interpret any of it, because there's just so many, like, just ideas here, and they're all super messy, but, like, on a moment-to-moment basis, it's just like, I can't what is the context for any individual screenshot of this game? It's just hard to like really pin down to someone who hasn't played it, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think unless any of y'all have anything that you were dying to say about this, that'll bring us to the close of this episode about Killer7, our first half.
Hold on. Let me check my notes here. I have, y'all MFs ever heard of 9/11? In quotes.
Oh wait, we didn't talk about Travis.
Oh yeah,
that's true.
What's up with him?
It's hard to know, because I know what, like, because he serves somewhat of an important role, but I do want to say that in the first mission they say, like, he is like one of the first people you killed.
Right. Yeah, like 30 years ago.
Yeah. So he's like, he's kind of one of those people one of the many people, as you're walking around the game, you hear from ghosts and stuff, and you will get confirmed that those are ghosts, because I think her name is Usagi or Kisagi. After you kill her in the previous mission, she comes back as a ghost in the third mission. And so they're just kind of like, here's what I think about geopolitics and America versus Japan, but also I'm wearing a shirt that says like sexual, or like just one of a number of tank tops.
He's like Frank in 30 Rock, who has just the different hat that says like horny every day. Like his just shirt just says like a random word.
Yeah, and it's like there's the one where like it's so funny how much this serves a design purpose of like there's the when you counter him in the gas station and his shirt says hustle. And he's just like thrusting, and like it's to get you to remember the word hustle because it's a password.
Yeah,
right.
But it's just like they just get to have this moment of like I'm just thrusting, and like, hey, by the way, the word on my shirt, the word on my shirt is important.
Oh, we also didn't talk about the decapitated head that.
Susie, yeah,
was okay. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. The victim of sexual abuse who then went and became a serial killer.
Yeah. Which, like, I recently watched Old Boy, and that feels like directly pulled from, the Park Chan-wook oeuvre of, like, here's this one plot line of this strange character that, goes on a killing spree. And then now she's just a disembodied head that speaks with emojis.
I wrote down the head's line, "These baby boomers don't know right from wrong."
Which, Suda, aren't you a baby boomer? I think Suda's older than my dad. You are a baby boomer.
Okay, well, we have so much still to talk about with Killer7. I cannot wait to finish this game. Suriel, is there anything you want to plug right now?
Yeah, a couple of things. I have a YouTube channel where I do essays. You can just Google my name on YouTube, Suriel Vasquez. I'm working on another one, but it's kind of a long ways away just because I noodle at it kind of on the weekends, more or less. I also have a weekly podcast where I talk about The Legend of Zelda, basically playing through Tears of the Kingdom as slowly as possible, kind of exploring every nook and cranny of it, and also playing another Zelda game right now. We're playing Spirit Tracks, everyone's favorite Zelda game. So that goes up. It's called Every Week I'm in Tears, and you can just find that on whatever podcast app you've got. So that's what I'm up to.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
A pleasure to have an expert on, because I think Blake and I, we have lots of thoughts about this game, but very little concrete information.
Sure. Yeah, that's everyone. And I'm really glad that you guys are into the game, because I think when I pitched it, I definitely made it with the risk of like, what if this is just the most bummer season of this podcast that I'm responsible for?
Dude, I'm so into it. I'm a little worried about Flower, Sun, and Rain.
Yeah.
That's the pain point, I think. That's
definitely like, in a lot of ways, it's more interesting, but like less fun, like just directly to play. That is a game, to be fair, about its tedium in a lot of ways, but that doesn't make the tedium any better. But
that's how I would describe this podcast sometimes.
I would say, in a lot of respects, this podcast is about tedious games.
Yeah. So when you guys started sending me texts about like I'm really into this game, I was like, okay, good. This will be like a good conversation, and I don't have to feel like I guilted you into playing something you're not super into. So
yeah,
I'm glad you guys like it.
We'll only have ourselves to blame if we don't like Flower, Sun, and Rain. But you know what? Wouldn't be the first time we hated a game on this podcast.
That's right. And until next time, my name is Jacob Geller. For Blake Hester, I just have to say, you're fucked!